When I first married David, we had nothing. No savings, no property, not even a car. We lived in a tiny one-room apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky ceiling. I still remember how, in the winter, we would put a bucket in the corner to catch the dripping water and laugh about how one day we'd be rich enough to fix all the roofs we wanted. David was ambitious. He had big dreams of starting a business, but he didn't have the money or the stability to make it happen. I, on the other hand, had a steady job at a small accounting office. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. Every month, I carefully tucked away part of my salary, whispering to myself, "This is our future. This is our chance." We didn't go out to eat, we didn't buy new clothes, and we certainly didn't take vacations. Every penny went into savings, and while David often talked about his big plans, it was me who kept us grounded. I budgeted, I saved, I made sure rent was always paid. Finally, after 2 long years, we had enough to open a little shop, a tiny corner grocery store with flickering lights and old shelves we bought secondhand. On the day we opened, David stood proudly at the entrance, shaking hands with customers, while I stood behind the counter, quietly running the register. And that became our pattern. He was the face of the business, the one people saw, the one people praised. But behind the scenes? I was the one handling suppliers, tracking expenses, and making sure we didn't collapse under debt. At night, after putting our newborn daughter to sleep, I would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by receipts, balancing the books by hand until my eyes blurred. David would tell me, "Don't worry so much, honey. People love me. The shop will do well because of me." I smiled, but deep down, I knew the truth. The shop only survived because of both of us. Slowly, painfully, the business grew. 1 store became 2, then 3. And with each expansion, David's pride grew too. He walked taller, dressed sharper, and spoke like a man who had made himself from nothing. But me? I was always introduced as just my wife. I didn't mind at first. After all, wasn't this what marriage was? A partnership? A shared dream? I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as our family was thriving. What I didn't know back then was that the very thing I built with love and sacrifice would one day be used to betray me. And when that day came, I wasn't just going to watch it happen. I was going to take back everything he thought was his. People say that behind every successful man, there's a woman who believed in him. But what they don't say is that belief alone isn't enough. Sometimes that woman is also the one holding everything together, silently, tirelessly, and without recognition. That woman was me. Our little grocery store had grown into 3 busy shops. From the outside, it looked like a dream come true. Customers came in and out with bags of produce and household goods. Neighbors admired how quickly we had risen, and David carried himself like a king in his own little kingdom. But what people didn't see was the truth that every brick of that kingdom was laid with my sacrifice. While David was out meeting suppliers or networking over expensive dinners, I was the one running the books. I was the one calculating every penny, making sure electricity bills were paid on time, and keeping track of which employees needed raises to stay loyal. There were nights when the children cried for my attention, but I couldn't leave the piles of receipts waiting on the kitchen table. I would rock our daughter with one arm and write down numbers with the other. My body was exhausted, my mind stretched thin, but I told myself this was necessary, because family comes first, always. I gave up new clothes, nice dinners, even little comforts for myself, just to keep our business afloat. I remember one night clearly. It was raining hard, and the roof of our old apartment leaked again. The children were shivering, and I only had one blanket to cover us all. David was out late at a meeting. I sat there in the dark, holding both kids close, whispering, "This is temporary. One day we'll have everything we need," and I believed it. But as the business expanded, I began to notice something unsettling. David was changing. At first, he was humble. He used to hug me and say, "We're a team. I couldn't do this without you." But then, slowly, those words disappeared. The hugs became less frequent. The gratitude faded. In their place grew pride that bordered on arrogance, When customers praised him, he soaked it in. When business partners complimented his empire, he smiled without ever correcting them. Not once did he say, "My wife is the reason we're thriving." To the world, I was invisible. Just his wife, just the helper, and I accepted it. Because I thought that's what love was, sharing success without needing the spotlight. But then came the late nights. David began coming home later and later. He smelled of wine, his suits reeked of perfume I didn't wear, and he would brush off my questions with vague excuses. Business dinners, sweetheart. Important contacts. You wouldn't understand. I wanted to believe him. I chose to believe him. Because the alternative, that he was lying, that he was betraying me, was too painful to face. Instead, I drowned myself in work. I tracked our profits, and the numbers didn't match his carefree spending. He was buying new watches, tailored suits, even a fancy car we couldn't really afford yet. I tried to warn him. I told him, "David, the cash flow isn't as strong as you think. We need to slow down." He laughed. "Relax, you're always worrying. People love me. The business is booming." He didn't even call it our business anymore. It was always my business. Still, I stayed silent, because silence had always been my role. I was the foundation, wasn't I? And foundations don't complain. But deep inside, cracks were forming. There were moments when I looked at him and wondered, who is this man? Where did my husband go, the one who used to hold me in the cold, who used to whisper dreams with me in the dark? Now, when he looked at me, it wasn't with love. It was with impatience, annoyance, as though my very presence was a burden. And yet, I kept sacrificing. I kept building. Because I believed that family meant putting everyone else first. What I didn't realize was that all my sacrifices weren't just building a business. They were building David's ego into a towering monster, a monster that would one day devour me whole. But here's the thing about monsters. They always underestimate the quiet ones. And when the time came, I would remind him that foundations may be silent, but they can also cause everything above them to crumble. The funny thing about betrayal is that it never arrives all at once. It seeps in slowly, like water through a crack in the wall. At first you don't notice. Then one day the entire structure collapses, and you realize the signs were there all along. You just didn't want to see them. For me, the signs began with distance. David used to come home eager to tell me about his day. Even if he was exhausted, he would sit at the table with me, sipping tea as I shared the numbers and updates. We would plan together. How to stock better, which shop needed more workers, whether we could afford another expansion. Those nights made me feel like we were true partners. But slowly, that changed. He started coming home later, at first, an hour late, then 3, then sometimes, not until the early morning hours, creeping in with the smell of alcohol and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. When I asked where he had been, he gave the same excuse every time. "Business meetings, sweetheart." You wouldn't understand. But I did understand. I understood numbers. And the numbers told me that no business meeting required thousands of dollars spent on dinners, drinks, and client entertainment. One night I decided to test him. I said, "David, I saw the account statement. Do you really think spending $800 on wine is good for the business?" He froze, just for a moment. Then he laughed. "Oh, come on. You worry too much. You think small? That's your problem. You'll never get anywhere if you don't spend money to make money." Spend money to make money. That became his mantra. But what he really meant was, spend money to feed his growing ego. I saw the way he dressed now. Tailored suits, silk ties, and watches that cost more than our first car. He had become addicted to the image of success, and I was fading into the background. At parties, he introduced me as my wife. She helps out with some of the books. Just helps out. As if the late nights, the endless receipts, the sacrifices I had made were nothing but a hobby. It stung, but I stayed silent. Because I thought, it doesn't matter who gets the credit, as long as our family is secure. But then came the rumors. One afternoon, as I was leaving our shop, I overheard 2 employees whispering near the stockroom. They didn't see me at first. "Have you seen the way David looks at her?" One of them giggled. "Please, everyone knows. the other replied. That new girl in the office? She's not there just for paperwork. I froze. My heart slammed in my chest. I wanted to confront them, but my feet wouldn't move. Instead, I walked away, pretending I hadn't heard. But I had, and their words haunted me. That night, when David came home late again, I stared at him as he undressed. His shirt smelled faintly of a woman's perfume, not mine. He caught me staring and smirked. What? You don't trust me? I forced a smile. Of course I do. But deep down, a part of me knew the truth. Still, I stayed silent. Because silence was easier than shattering the life we had built. If I accused him and I was wrong, I would look paranoid. If I was right, everything would come crashing down. So I swallowed my doubts. I buried my pain. But silence doesn't stop the truth from growing louder. The cracks widened when David stopped asking my opinion on the business altogether. He made decisions without me, big ones. Hiring new staff, opening a fourth shop, signing contracts I had never seen. When I asked him why, he snapped, I don't need to explain everything to you. You're not the boss. Not the boss. Those words cut deeper than any knife. I was the one who had built the foundation, who had carried the weight when he was dreaming too big, too fast. And now he stood there, looking at me as if I was nothing more than an obstacle in his way. But I didn't argue. Not yet. Because I had learned something over the years. Silence is powerful. People mistake silence for weakness, but it's not. Silence is patience, and patience can turn into power. So I stayed quiet, watching, waiting, and working. And while David thought he was rising higher, he didn't realize that the cracks in our marriage were also cracks in his empire. Because one day soon, everything he thought was his business, his pride, his new life, would come crashing down. And I would be the one holding the hammer. Betrayal has a smell. It clings to clothes, lingers on the skin, and whispers in the air long after the act is done. I had been ignoring it for months, pretending the faint perfume on David's shirts or the lipstick stains on his collar were figments of my imagination. Pretending I didn't notice the sudden late-night phone calls that ended when I walked into the room. But you can only ignore the truth for so long. The truth walked into my life one afternoon, bold as daylight. I was in our main office, going over invoices, when a young woman breezed through the front door. She couldn't have been older than 25. Perfectly styled hair, expensive perfume, and a smile that screamed arrogance. I'm looking for David, she said, tossing her purse onto the receptionist's desk as if she owned the place. I frowned. He's in a meeting. And you are? She tilted her chin at me, her eyes sparkling with something I didn't yet understand. Oh, I'm his new assistant. Assistant. That was the word she used. But the way she said it, the way she looked at me, like I was just another piece of old furniture in the office, told me exactly what she meant. When David finally emerged, his face lit up at the sight of her. Too much, too quickly. He placed a hand on her back as he guided her into his office, completely ignoring my questioning gaze. That night, when I asked him about her, he didn't even bother to lie. She's helping me with the new expansion, he said casually, loosening his tie. You should be happy, sweetheart. This is good for the business, I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, but my throat locked. All I could do was nod, even as my stomach twisted into knots. Weeks passed, and she was everywhere. At the shops, at the office, even at social events where I used to stand by his side. Now she was there, her hand on his arm, her laughter ringing too loudly, too often. The whispers around town grew louder. People stopped looking me in the eye. Employees pitied me with their glances. Friends avoided awkward conversations. Until one evening, the whispers became reality. David came home, his face unusually serious. He didn't sit down. He didn't hug me. He just stood there, arms crossed, and said words I never thought I'd hear. I think we should separate. The world tilted under my feet. What? He didn't even flinch. I've been unhappy for a long time. You and I, we've grown apart. I want a divorce. Tears stung my eyes, but he didn't stop. It's for the best. We'll figure out the business. Don't worry. You'll be taken care of. Taken care of, as if I was some charity case, as if the business I had built with my blood and sweat wasn't mine at all. But the knife twisted deeper when, a week later, he moved her into our home. Our home. The house where I had raised our children, cooked meals, scrubbed floors, and prayed for better days. The house where every corner held a memory of love and struggle. She walked in as if she owned it, wearing my slippers, drinking from my cups, sleeping in my bed. And David? He acted like it was normal, like I was the intruder. I stayed quiet, because that's what I had always done. But inside, a fire was building. Every giggle I overheard, every whisper in the dark, every smug smile from that woman, it all added fuel to the flames. I was humiliated, broken, but not defeated. Because while they thought they were winning, living in my house, enjoying my sacrifices, they didn't know one simple truth. The foundation of everything they had was me. And one day soon I was going to remind them, not with tears, not with begging, but with power. The kind of power that would leave them with nothing. After David moved his mistress into our home, I felt like a ghost wandering through my own life. My slippers on her feet, my kitchen filled with her perfume, my bed creaking under their laughter. Every night, I cried silently into my pillow, but I refused to let them see me break. If I was going to shatter, I would do it alone. Not in front of them. Never in front of them. The humiliation cut deep. But life has a way of giving us answers in the strangest moments. One afternoon, I went to clear out my old office at the company headquarters. David had told me not to bother, that someone else would handle the paperwork from now on. I smiled, nodded, and left him with his arrogance. But I needed to gather my personal things, photographs of the children, old notebooks, and a small ceramic mug our daughter had painted for me when she was 6. As I sorted through dusty files, I found a faded envelope wedged behind the cabinet drawer. It was yellowed with age, the edges curling. Something about it made me pause. When I pulled it out and unfolded the papers inside, my heart stopped. They were our original incorporation documents, the legal foundation of the company. I sat down, my hands trembling as I scanned the text. And then my eyes widened. Ownership, 60%. Me, 40%. David. I blinked, reading it again and again, unable to believe what I was seeing. I remembered that day, years ago, when we had rushed to file the paperwork. David had been too busy charming suppliers to bother with the details, so he let me handle everything. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I just signed where the lawyer told me to. But the lawyer had been clear. Since most of the investment money had come from my savings, the majority share would be in my name. And David had agreed, too distracted to care. Now, here it was. Proof. I wasn't just his helper. I wasn't just his silent partner. I was the majority shareholder, 60%. My lips curled into the first genuine smile I had worn in months. I could still hear David's arrogant words echoing in my head. You're not the boss. Oh, but I was. I held the papers against my chest, the weight of them heavier than gold. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But I didn't rush. Number. I knew better than that. I had spent years watching David build his ego brick by brick, thinking he was untouchable. And now I was going to let him keep building. Let him climb higher, higher, until the fall broke him completely. That night, I returned home quietly. I saw them sitting at the dinner table, laughing over a bottle of wine I had bought years ago and saved for a special occasion. They looked at me like I was an intruder, a stranger in my own home. I wanted to slam the papers down on the table, watch their smug faces crumble. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I tucked the envelope safely into my purse and went upstairs without a word. Because now, silence was no longer my weakness. It was my weapon. Over the next weeks, I watched carefully. David's spending grew reckless. He was burning money on luxury cars, vacations with her, and endless parties to show off his success. He believed he was untouchable, the king of an empire he thought belonged solely to him. But I knew the truth. The empire was mine, and when the moment was right, I was going to remind both of them, that the foundation they stood on belonged not to David, not to his mistress, but to me. They thought they had broken me, but all they had done was awaken the silent partner, and the silent partner was about to roar. Power is a strange thing. When you've lived your whole life without it, you don't always know what to do when it finally lands in your hands. That's how I felt after discovering those papers. My name, 60% ownership, proof that I was the true backbone of the business. But power without patience is wasted. And if there was one thing my years of sacrifice had taught me, it was patience. So, I didn't storm into David's office waving the papers like a victory flag. I didn't confront him at the dinner table or scream in his face. Number. That would have been too easy for him. He would have laughed, found a way to spin it, maybe even threatened me. Instead, I watched. I waited, and I let him dig his own grave. The first cracks were financial. David had always been reckless with money, but now that he had the mistress by his side, his spending spiraled out of control. He was buying her jewelry, designer handbags, and first-class tickets to vacations she flaunted on social media. The company credit card bled with charges that had nothing to do with business. I didn't stop him. When employees complained that their paychecks were late, David shrugged it off. "We'll catch up next month," he told them. But I knew the truth. He was draining the accounts faster than they could fill. I didn't stop him. When suppliers called me, panicked about unpaid invoices, I calmed them down. "Don't worry," I said softly. "I'll make sure it's handled." And then I'd quietly move money around to keep things afloat, just enough to prevent collapse, but not enough for David to notice, because I needed the business alive, not for him, not for her, for me, for my children, for the empire I had truly built. Meanwhile, I started building my case. Late at night, while they slept in my bed, I sat downstairs with the incorporation papers spread across the table. I highlighted every clause, every line that proved my authority. I contacted a lawyer I trusted, a woman who had seen too many wives discarded after giving everything. She smiled when she saw my documents. "You own him," she said simply. Her words felt like fire in my veins. Still, I didn't rush, because I wanted more than legal power. I wanted moral victory. I wanted the world to see David for what he truly was, a greedy, careless fool who had forgotten the hand that fed him. So, I began to gather evidence. I collected receipts of his personal spending from company funds. I saved screenshots of his mistress's lavish posts online. I listened quietly to employees grumbling about favoritism, about how promotions were handed to people who didn't deserve them, people like her. The more I collected, the clearer the picture became. David wasn't a successful businessman. He was a fraud wearing a mask, and sooner or later that mask would slip. One evening as I returned home, I heard laughter echoing from the living room. David and his mistress were celebrating something, glasses of champagne in their hands. "We're going global, baby," he boasted, slapping down a folder. "New shops in 3 cities by next year. No one can stop me." She squealed, kissing him as if he had just conquered the world. I stood in the doorway, silent, watching. Inside, my heart pounded. Expansion. With what money? We were barely holding on, and he was planning to gamble everything. That was when I knew. The time was coming. But not yet, because the higher he climbed, the harder he would fall. So I kept quiet, smiling when I had to, nodding when he ignored me, pretending to be the shadow he believed I was. All the while, my silence was not weakness. It was strategy. And while he boasted, while he bragged, while he burned money and loyalty like kindling, I tightened my grip on the one thing he had forgotten existed, the foundation. The foundation was mine. And when I finally moved, it wouldn't just shake his empire. It would bring the whole thing crashing down on his head. The day began like any other. David left early, dressed in one of his expensive suits, rushing to an important meeting with investors. His mistress was right behind him, wearing a designer dress I knew had been purchased with company money. But today wasn't like any other. Today, I was done being invisible. I took my time. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, but powerful in its own quiet way. The kind of outfit that said, I don't need to shout to be heard. In my bag were the papers. The original incorporation documents, signed and sealed. Proof that 60% of the company was mine. Alongside them were carefully organized files, receipts of David's reckless spending, screenshots of social media posts, and a list of debts he had buried beneath layers of arrogance. By the time I arrived at the office, the boardroom was buzzing. David sat at the head of the table, mistress beside him like some kind of queen. Investors and senior managers surrounded them, listening eagerly as he spoke about his vision for expansion. And with your support, David boasted, we'll be opening 3 new branches by the end of the year. Our brand will dominate the market. We'll leave competitors choking in the dust. Applause erupted around the table. He smiled like a king. Then I stepped inside. The room went quiet. Some of the managers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew me. They remembered the nights I worked late, the mornings I balanced books. They hadn't seen me in months. David's smile faltered. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice sharp. I didn't answer him. Instead, I walked calmly to the opposite end of the table and placed my folder down. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, "before you continue discussing expansion, there's something you all need to see." David stood abruptly. "This is nonsense. She has no authority here." I opened the folder and slid the incorporation documents across the table. "Actually," I said coolly, "I have more authority than anyone in this room." The investors leaned forward, scanning the papers. Murmurs rippled through the boardroom. One of them, a sharp-eyed woman in a gray blazer, looked up. "These show majority ownership," she said slowly. 60%, not you, David." Her. The color drained from his face. "That's impossible," he shouted. "This is forged." "It isn't," I interrupted, pulling out the original notarized copies, signed on the very day this business was founded. When I put up the collateral from my savings, my work, and my sacrifices. While you, I glanced at him coldly, were chasing dreams you couldn't afford. His mistress shifted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence fading. I continued, pulling out another set of documents. And here's more. Company credit card statements, tens of thousands spent on personal luxuries, jewelry, vacations, designer clothes, not for the business but for... I let my eyes fall briefly on her. Personal entertainment. The room buzzed louder now. Investors exchanged worried looks. One of the managers whispered, "That's why salaries were late." David slammed his fist on the table. "Don't listen to her!" "She's bitter, jealous, trying to destroy me because she can't handle the fact that I've moved on." But the evidence was undeniable. I had built this case like a fortress, every detail locked in place. I leaned forward, my voice low but sharp as a blade. I sacrificed everything for this company. I stayed up nights, balanced the books, made sure we survived when we were inches away from bankruptcy. And how did you repay me? You discarded me. You moved another woman into my home, thinking I was weak, thinking I would just disappear. Silence hung over the room. Everyone could feel it, the shift in power. I stood tall, looking directly at the investors. From this moment on, David is no longer in charge. As majority owner, I will be restructuring leadership. Effective immediately, David's face twisted with rage. "You can't do this to me." "Yes, I can," I said firmly, "and I already have." With that, I handed over the legal paperwork my lawyer had prepared, officially removing him from decision-making authority. The investors wasted no time. They didn't want to tie themselves to a sinking ship. One by one, they nodded, acknowledging me as the rightful leader. David turned desperately to his mistress. "Say something! Tell them!" But she was already sliding her chair back, distancing herself from him. The shine in her eyes had vanished. She hadn't signed up for a sinking empire. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but found none. The very people who once praised him now looked at him with thinly veiled disgust. And me? I felt no pity. "Get out, David," I said coldly. "Take your things, take your lies, and take your mistress. But you will not take this company. Not anymore." For the first time in years, I saw fear in his eyes. The king had been dethroned, and I was the one holding the crown. The boardroom showdown ended with David storming out, his mistress trailing behind like a shadow that had lost its light. The silence that followed was deafening. For years, his voice had filled these walls with arrogance and empty promises. Now, only my steady breathing remained. But the war wasn't over. Taking power was one thing. Keeping it, that was the real test. The investors turned their eyes to me. Some were relieved, some skeptical. I could see the questions etched in their faces. Can she handle it? Can she save us? I straightened my shoulders. "I know trust isn't built overnight," I told them. "But you all know the truth. When the numbers didn't add up, it was me fixing them. When the stores were struggling, it was me keeping them alive. This company has always been my work, my sacrifice. Now I intend to make it our success." The room slowly nodded. Even the sharp-eyed woman in the gray blazer gave a small, approving smile. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. The days that followed were chaos. David didn't go quietly. He called the office, shouting threats. He posted on social media, painting me as a cold-hearted woman who had stolen everything from him. Some of his friends even reached out to me, parroting his lies. But words are weak against proof. When I released the financial records showing his misuse of company funds, the public opinion shifted. Employees rallied behind me. Suppliers who had nearly walked away now saw me as a savior. The community whispered about the downfall of the great David and about the woman who had risen from the shadows to claim her place. Still, at night, when the house was too quiet, I felt the weight of it all. I walked through rooms where his laughter used to echo, where my children once played. Now those same walls held only memories and a faint, bitter smell of betrayal. But instead of breaking me, it hardened me. One evening, while going through paperwork, I received a message from an old employee, someone who had left months earlier because David hadn't paid her on time. She wrote, "We always knew it was you keeping things together. Thank you for finally stepping into the light." I read that message over and over, tears stinging my eyes. For so long, I thought silence was strength, that sacrificing my name, my credit, my recognition was noble. But what I had really done was allow David to take everything while I shrank smaller and smaller. Not anymore. The first major decision I made was cleaning house. Anyone David had promoted out of favoritism was demoted or fired, not out of revenge, but because their incompetence was poisoning the company. I replaced them with hard-working employees who had been overlooked, people who stayed late without complaint, who believed in the company the way I once had. The difference was immediate. Morale lifted. Sales improved. Customers returned, noticing the renewed energy in the stores. And me? I found my rhythm. Meetings, budgets, expansion plans. They no longer felt like chores done in secret. They were mine to lead, openly and unapologetically. I even reclaimed my home. David had left it in shambles, broken furniture, unpaid bills, a lingering arrogance in every corner. But I cleaned it, repainted the walls, and filled it with my own touch again. Slowly, it became my space, not a monument to his betrayal. But as much as I thrived, I knew David wouldn't vanish easily. One night, as I left the office, I found him waiting near my car. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. The mistress was gone, no surprise there. "You can't do this to me," he said, voice shaking. "You're nothing without me." I almost laughed. "Funny," I replied. "That's exactly what you used to tell me. And yet, here we are." He stepped closer, desperation in his eyes. "Give me back control. We can fix this. We can be us again. I stared at him for a long moment. Once upon a time, I would have given anything to hear him say those words, but now they sounded hollow. A drowning man begging for a lifeboat he himself had set on fire. I don't need fixing, I said firmly, and neither does the company. The only thing broken here is you. With that, I got into my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the dark. Weeks passed. The business blossomed. New investors approached me, not because of David's empty charisma, but because of my transparent, strategic leadership. Employees started calling me the heart of the company. Customers even sent letters of appreciation, thanking me for restoring honesty to the brand. Every success was a reminder I had been the real foundation all along. And David? He faded further into irrelevance. Word spread of his debts, of friends who abandoned him once the money dried up. The mistress had left him for another wealthy man, proving her loyalty had been as shallow as his pride. He was alone. Homeless, some whispered. A man who had once strutted like a king, now reduced to begging for scraps of recognition. I should have felt pity, but I didn't, because pity is for the undeserving. One evening, standing in my office, I looked out the window at the city lights glowing against the night sky. For years, I had watched those same lights from the shadows, dreaming of a day when I'd matter. And now, that day had come. I wasn't just a survivor. I was a leader. And David? He had called me a burden once. He had tried to make me invisible. But now, the world saw him for what he truly was. Nothing more than the weight I had carried until I finally chose to set it down. The empire he thought was his was always mine. And now, it stood taller than ever. Morning light streamed through the office windows, painting the walls gold. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not the fragile peace of silence after a fight, but the steady, enduring peace of freedom. The business was thriving again. Sales climbed, morale soared, and investors who once questioned me now praised my leadership. But it wasn't just the company that was changing. I was changing too. I wasn't the woman who had once hidden behind her husband's shadow, sacrificing everything just to be enough. I wasn't the woman who walked silently past betrayal, clutching her dignity in trembling hands. I was someone new, someone stronger. The changes began small. I started reclaiming myself in ways I had long forgotten. I went to the gym, not to punish my body, but to honor it. I tried cooking new recipes, filling the house with scents that belonged to me, not memories of him. I planted flowers in the garden, each bloom a declaration that beauty could grow again, even in places once trampled. For the first time, I bought something for myself without guilt. A necklace, not expensive, not flashy, but delicate and strong. As I clasped it around my neck, I whispered, "You deserve this," and I meant it. But the true rebirth came through the people around me. Employees who had once feared David now came to me with ideas, trusting I would listen. I encouraged them, nurtured them, reminded them that every voice mattered. Slowly, the company wasn't just a business, it became a family again. One afternoon, a young manager named Elena stood in my office, nervous but excited. "I've been working on a new marketing strategy," she said, holding out a folder. "I know it's bold, but I think it could double our outreach." I smiled, taking the folder. "Show me." Her face lit up with relief. Under David, ideas like hers would have been laughed out of the room. Under me, they had space to grow. And as I watched her passion, I realized something profound. I wasn't just rebuilding a company. I was building a legacy. A place where no one would ever feel invisible the way I had. Of course, shadows still lingered. Sometimes I caught whispers of David drifting through the city, rumors of him staying on friends' couches, of his debts piling higher than he could manage. Each story carried the same thread. The man who had once boasted of empire was now reduced to rubble. One night, as I walked home, I passed him. He sat on a bench, clothes wrinkled, hair unkempt, staring at the ground like it held the answers he had lost. He didn't see me at first, But when he finally looked up, our eyes met. For a moment, silence stretched between us, filled with everything unspoken. "You ruined me," he said hoarsely, bitterness dripping from his voice. I didn't flinch. "No," I replied calmly, "you ruined yourself. I just stopped carrying you." I walked away, my heels clicking against the pavement, leaving him swallowed by the same darkness he had once forced on me. And for the first time, I felt no anger, no sadness, only release. Months passed, and life blossomed in ways I had never imagined. The company expanded, not recklessly, as David had dreamed, but carefully, strategically. Each new branch was a success story. Investors praised my leadership, but I knew the real success was deeper. It was the culture we built, the honesty we maintained, the trust we earned. And outside the business, my personal life began to heal too. I reconnected with old friends I had once pushed aside, ashamed of the secrets I carried. I even took a trip with my children, just the three of us, to the seaside we had always dreamed of visiting. Watching them laugh in the waves, free from the tension that had once hung over our home, I felt tears on my cheeks. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. We had survived. We had rebuilt. I had rebuilt. One evening, as I stood in the garden among the flowers I had planted, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. I thought about the woman who had once believed she was nothing without him. The woman who endured sleepless nights, endless sacrifices, and silent tears. The woman who almost forgot her own worth. She was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone unbreakable, someone who knew that power wasn't in the applause of others or the approval of a husband, but in the quiet knowledge of her own strength. I had lost a marriage, I had lost years, but I had gained something far greater, myself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, I whispered into the twilight, "This is my new dawn." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it. Years have passed since the storm. The company that David once nearly destroyed now stands stronger than ever. Each new branch carries not just the weight of a business, but the weight of a lesson, one built on sacrifice, resilience, and the unshakable truth that the foundation matters more than the facade. I am no longer the invisible wife. I am the leader, the builder, the survivor. But more than that, I am me, a woman who has finally learned her worth. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how I endured it all. The late nights hunched over invoices while he drank champagne with strangers. The humiliation of seeing another woman wearing jewelry I had paid for with my labor. The silence I carried, afraid that if I spoke, the whole fragile structure would collapse. But that silence was my prison. And the day I broke it was the day I truly began to live. The greatest mistake I made wasn't trusting David. It was forgetting myself. Believing that my sacrifices didn't matter because no one clapped for them. Believing that being invisible was the same as being strong. I see now that strength isn't about disappearing. It's about standing tall, even when no one wants to see you. David's story ended differently. The man who once strutted like a king, adored by everyone, is now a ghost of his former self. I hear whispers of him sometimes, living in a rented room, bouncing from one failed scheme to another. The mistress left long ago. The friends who toasted his success vanished the moment the money dried up. He is alone, and while I don't celebrate his downfall, I don't mourn it either. He reaped what he sowed. The seeds of arrogance and betrayal always grow into weeds, and weeds, when left unchecked, will always choke out the garden. My garden, on the other hand, flourishes, both literally and figuratively. The flowers I planted bloom brighter every year. The company thrives with loyal employees who believe in more than profit. They believe in fairness, in teamwork, in integrity. And my children, they grew up watching me rise from ashes, learning that dignity is worth more than diamonds. That is the legacy I will leave them. Not wealth, not buildings, not even the company itself, but the lesson that no one, not even someone you love, has the right to make you feel small. I often think about the night I passed David on that bench, his broken voice accusing me of ruining him. At the time, I walked away with my head high, certain of my truth. But later, when I replayed his words, I realized something. In his mind, I had ruined him. And maybe, in a way, I had. But not by betrayal, not by vengeance. I ruined him by finally refusing to carry the weight of his failures, by setting down the burden he had forced on me for years, by reclaiming the empire that was always mine. That was my final lesson. Sometimes the greatest act of power is simply letting go. So what did I learn from all of it? That love without respect is not love. It's a cage. That sacrifice without recognition is not noble. It's exploitation. And that silence, though it feels like strength, can sometimes be the very chain that holds you down. But most importantly, I learned this. When you finally find the courage to rise, when you finally reclaim your voice, there is nothing more powerful. Because the world may try to forget you. Men like David may try to erase you. But the truth is unshakable. You cannot erase the foundation. And I was always the foundation. As I stand now at the edge of a new horizon, watching the company grow beyond anything I once imagined, I know one thing for certain. I didn't just survive him. I didn't just outlast him. I became more than he ever thought I could be. And that is the final lesson I want to leave behind. Not just for my children, not just for my employees, but for anyone who has ever felt invisible, small, or unworthy. You are not a burden. You are not replaceable. And you are never as powerless as they want you to believe. Because one day, when you choose to rise, you may just discover that the crown was yours all along, and no one, no betrayal, no arrogance, no selfish man can ever take it away.